In the other hype matchup of the day on the first day of play-ins, you wouldn't think that you'd be hearing DRX versus RNG playing on this early. This goes to show just how stacked this new format is for the world stage and shows the level of play we're about to expect. Although many teams have been scrimming each other, the meta still needs a lot of time to get figured out. Specifically in this draft, I think there is one pick that RNG really went for that could have been amazing in the right circumstances, but both RNG and DRX failed to understand these conditions and actually bit themselves in the foot here. If you enjoyed this analysis, would love a sub for more content like this. Let's hop into the draft. Starting off with the bans, DRX banned out Fiora, Poppy, and Talia, whereas RNG banned out Silas, Caitlyn, and Yuumi. Notable bans in this case are the Silas ban coming out from RNG, and honestly the entirety of the bans in the case of DRX. On blue side, Worlds has cleared the way for a lot of strong counter picks in the meta right now, so blue is all about getting rid of those stupid picks that can really single-handedly cause problems in your entire draft plan, and this is what DRX is going for. Out of the bans, the B1 is Aatrox, which further justifies that Fiora ban that DRX also went for in phase 1. Aatrox has further and further justified himself as a really strong opener in this meta so far, with his ability to function in most team compositions, and no real sign of teams attempting to switch up their focus to matchups. People haven't been favoring it so far. In my opinion though, although the Aatrox is a pretty strong pick overall, I think it'll be a matter of time before teams play around more with different matchups and see that other things are possible against it. You can either pick other forward champions that can still function into it, or you can try to draft tech champions that can potentially just try to outvalue Aatrox in major team fights and such. You see RNG experiment with this fact, and they actually swing for the Jax matchup along with the Vi pick in R1, R2. This is definitely kind of wild coming from them, and I think this is normally the signal for DRX to just draft backwards. These picks are likely because RNG have a really good idea of how they play the game, and they're just drafting to that. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea though, and I think that DRX should know that they can just draft tools that can maximize safety, or they can also counterpick with engage themselves. Champions like Braum, Tahm Kench, Azir, and Trundle, backwards champions that can mitigate Vi specifically, along with whatever other forward champions RNG have in store, will be what I'm specifically looking to see out of DRX in the B2, B3, and in this draft in general. Aatrox also fares well in the front to back comps that this ends up creating, so I will like the direction of this draft. This is where we see some new adaptations in this world's meta right now, as DRX lock in Maokai and Akali. What's interesting to me is that I honestly think that Aatrox and Akali are relatively interchangeable here depending on what RNG lock in as their mid laner. DRX do give up the fact that they're giving up both solo lanes this early and are leaning towards strong team fighting themselves. In terms of matchups, Akali also fares better into Jax than Aatrox will, but this does leave it up to RNG to lock in a mid matchup that can take advantage of this. Historically though, Akali cannot be countered that hard in terms of her matchup directly, but more so the team composition that's built to counter her in general. The Maokai is also super interesting because it went through some really nice changes in this world's meta. Since both solo laners have been picked from DRX, I'd say this is likely support, but it's also a chance of actually getting flexed to jungle as well. For R3, Xiaohu takes the LeBlanc, which is overall a standard but good pairing for RNG to round out phase 1 and give natural power into mid for early phases of the game, which is really great for these Chinese teams to really run it home. Key things missing here are that no ADCs have been picked up at all in this game. Bans are definitely going to be focused on that pool, as that's where the most variance in team compositions can be controlled at this point with both forward and backward ADCs. DRX should be looking to ban high value AD carries that can cause problems for the specific matchup they're aiming for. They don't necessarily have to ban forward ADCs like Kai'Sa right now because their comp doesn't actually get countered by backline dive right now, but if they want to go for it, they can. Most of the field is also open, so a lot of power is actually in RNG to maximize their pick in R5, and I'd like to see them use it on AD carry here. RNG should be looking to ban out blind picks that can secure good matchups in lane no matter what, as well as ban out some backwards champions that can cause problems for champions like Vi anyway. Reflecting this, RNG ban out Kalista and Xayah, and while DRX get rid of Aphelios and Kai'Sa. For R4, RNG blind picked the Nilah. While I really appreciate the spice here and I think Nilah can be an absolutely disgusting pick in the right conditions, those conditions need to be met in order for her to shine. Obviously, she's a little bit different than most AD carries in the game because she's got by far the lowest range out of any viable AD carry. But because of this, she has some extremely unique and oppressive tools that can spell checkmate for drafts with certain teams. This does mean that these conditions need to be met, and she is one of the strongest, if not the strongest counterpick ADCs in the game. Just to get everyone up to speed here, Nilah is categorized uniquely as an AD carry that can create engaged team compositions, especially with enchanters, which is very unique. I can tell you right now that there's no other AD carry in the game that can do this, and she has some other interesting quirks too. Uniquely, as someone with a forward playstyle, she actually scales incredibly hard too, thanks to her nice pairings with enchanters and decent synergy with engaged champions. However, there are two specific conditions that need to be met in order for Nilah to be effective. She can either be picked in super slow lanes against AD carries that are looking to do nothing, or she can be picked against forward ADCs like Tristana, Kai'Sa, and Samira and completely stat check them. If neither of these conditions are met, then Nilah can still have a very rough time in laning phase due to most ADCs just giving her a terrible range disadvantage that she cannot play around. This results in very little flexibility around your wave timings, and your scaling, which is your biggest strength, can be completely mitigated since scaling is contextual to how abilities interact. This all means that overall Nilah is not that great of a blind pick champion, so I think it's pretty interesting to see it here. The funniest thing is that I don't even think DRX did that great of a job taking advantage of this. They ended up picking Tristana Rel in the B4, B5, which just actually plays into this Nilah pick anyway. I'll give them credit and keep in mind that some picks in the game have been hedged out here because of the rest of RNG's comp. MF looks pretty hard to play here, and specifically, and Seraphine would provide a great matchup, but this would mean that DRX's comp has too much AP at this point, so that's not as possible. I think great picks here could be Jhin paired with Leona to round out the comp, or you can even pick things like Ashen paired with champions like Braum and Tahm Kench. Normally you wouldn't go for champions like this, but since the pool is just choked so hard, you'd have to start getting creative. Even moving Maokai to support here and then picking a defensive jungler like Trundle also works well. There were definitely options for DRX to punish harder here, and I would have liked to see the Nilah drafted around better from both sides, honestly. Alistair rounds out the R5 pick since RNG has basically committed to forward anyways, provides a decent matchup into the Rel while being still forward as a champion, and this pretty much completes the draft. Both teams are categorized by full forward Ooga styling as Asian teams do generally. I think there were definitely some weird things with this draft as well, like with the Vi early pick and all of those shenanigans with the Nilah. I think this draft is honestly pretty messy in the end, and both teams just seem like they want to play what they know. Although both teams had opportunities to punish, it ended up generally evening out, and this draft is actually basically about who executes these team fights better. I think that overall though, DRX still has the capability to kind of play either direction with their champs, and as long as they're navigating around that engage from RNG, they have more tools to play with in terms of team fighting and early game. RNG simply have no choice but to engage in this case, so although they have winning matchups in their lanes, their fights are actually harder to be successful with. So overall, I'd rate this draft 55-45 in favor of DRX. Very interesting stuff though. As always though, hopefully this draft was insightful to you guys, and I will catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.